Shirley Jones, now 92, has finally chosen to reveal a truth she kept hidden for decades. Truth that challenges the picture-perfect family America believed they knew. Although the public saw her as the wholesome mother, loyal wife, and smiling matriarch of a musical dynasty, her real home life was filled with tension, fractured relationships, and choices that carried lasting pain. She now admits that fame reached into her private world in ways fans never imagined, influencing her marriage, her children, and the silence she maintained for years. To audiences, she symbolized stability. The Oscar-winning actress, who became television's perfect mother, her warmth on screen made it easy to believe her life was just as steady. But she confesses that things at home were far more complicated. Growing up in a strict Pennsylvania household built on discipline, Sunday church, and protecting the family name, she carried those expectations into her own family life. Hollywood, however, offered no privacy. The attention followed her everywhere at stores, school events, even vacations, and every misstep risked becoming a headline. She lived in constant fear that the line between her professional image and private struggles would collapse. Balancing intense work demands with motherhood left her exhausted. After long filming days, she came home to cook, help with homework, and maintain order, always afraid she was failing in both duties. Behind the polished facade were arguments with her husband, battles over discipline with her sons, and nights when she cried alone, feeling more isolated than famous. As her boys grew older, they resented the expectations placed on them. People compared their real home to Shirley's television life, assuming the same cheerful stability. But the boys lived with tempers, their father's unpredictability, and the constant pressure of being watched. She tried to keep the family together with curfews, church attendance, and grounding when needed, yet the cracks widened. Jack Cassidy's instability seeped into the household. She could no longer shield the children from it. Silence became her way of coping. She believed that speaking openly would hurt her career and embarrass her family, so she kept smiling for cameras while tucking her children into bed, fully aware that the first fractures had already begun. Whenever she speaks about Jack Cassidy, she pauses. She still calls him one of the most magnetic men she ever knew, handsome, charming, and captivating to the world. But he was also restless, unpredictable, and at times destructive. Their marriage began like a dream. Shirley, already an Academy Award winner in her early 20s, was swept into Jack's world of music, parties, and constant motion. They dazzled their friends, but Shirley noticed early signs: mood swings, late nights, and an energy that could shift instantly from excitement to anger. At first, she pushed her doubts aside. She was young, deeply in love, and convinced that marriage and children would steady Jack. They married in 1956 and soon welcomed 3 sons: Sean, Patrick, and Ryan. For a time, she believed family life had grounded him. But as her career soared and his became less certain, Jack turned increasingly toward excitement, affairs, reckless spending, and the nightlife of Hollywood and New York. Their marriage fell into a painful rhythm. He would charm her into believing things had changed, then disappear into behavior that left her hurt and alone. Their children grew up noticing raised voices, slammed doors, and long absences that punctuated their early memories. Shirley tried desperately to hold the family together, but slowly began to wonder if leaving might cause less damage than staying. As her success grew, Jack struggled with being overshadowed. His resentment fueled instability at home, and she wrestled with reconciling the charismatic man she loved with the one her children were beginning to fear. The breaking point arrived when his affairs hit the press and his temper worsened. She worried most about the boys. They adored him, but they were also absorbing the chaos he created. Deep down, she realized the pattern would never end. In the early 1970s, she made the painful decision to separate. Divorce still carried a heavy stigma, but she believed remaining in the marriage would ultimately harm her children more. She has always said she didn't leave because she stopped loving Jack. She left to protect her sons. The decision reshaped every part of their lives, creating tension, complicated co-parenting, and confusion for the boys. Looking back, Shirley says she learned that charm and passion can only sustain a marriage for so long. Without trust and stability, even the strongest attraction eventually crumbles. She loved Jack, but she could no longer ignore the consequences of his choices. Those consequences would become even clearer on a single night in December 1976. On December 12, 1976, everything changed. Jack Cassidy was alone in his West Hollywood apartment. He had spent the evening out. No one knows exactly what happened after he returned home. Hours later, a fire swept through the building, and Jack never escaped. He was only 49. News reached Shirley in fragments of phone call, then confirmation from authorities, and finally, the headline she had always feared. Though they were divorced, he was still the father of her children, and her first thought was of the boys. Sean, Patrick, and Ryan were old enough to grasp what death meant. She has said no acting role prepared her for the moment she had to tell them. She gathered them together and explained their father was gone. The silence that followed was heavier than anything she had ever experienced. The boys didn't just lose a father, they lost the chance for reconciliation, for answers. For one last explanation from him, public reaction was overwhelming. With headlines celebrating Jack as a star, but at home, Shirley was managing grief layered with guilt. She questioned whether leaving the marriage had somehow contributed to this ending. She knew logically it hadn't, but emotionally she carried the weight for years. Each son processed the loss differently. Sean tried to be strong, Patrick withdrew, and Ryan became more sensitive. They weren't only mourning their father, they were haunted by how he died and the absence of final words. Those wounds shaped their teenage years. Meanwhile, Shirley faced public expectations and reporters who wanted statements. While privately confiding to friends that she feared for her children's future, she worried whether they might repeat Jack's patterns and whether she could guide them alone. Over time, she revealed how the boys carried not just grief, but anger at their father, at his choices, and at a world that honored his fame while overlooking the pain he caused at home. She also acknowledged that decades later, part of her still replays the decisions she made. Jack's death closed one chapter and forced her into another, one where she stepped fully into the role of protector and guide. Every rule, every lesson, every responsibility now rested solely on her. But the most challenging relationship she faced wasn't with her own sons. It was with Jack's other child. When Shirley married Jack Cassidy, she didn't just become a wife. She became a stepmother. Jack already had a son from his marriage to Evelyn Warda, a boy named David, who would later become one of the biggest teen idols in the world. Long before the fame and posters, David was a child trying to find his place in a blended family. Shirley has often said she cared for him as though he were her own. He lived with her and Jack for long stretches of his childhood, and she always tried to ensure he felt included. She set the same rules for David that she set for her own son's homework done. Chores completed, good manners at the dinner table. But there was always the awareness that David had another mother, and that meant boundaries Shirley tried not to cross. She has admitted that it was never simple to know when to step in and when to hold back. As David grew older, the family dynamic became more tangled. He was close in age to Sean, and they often behaved like brothers playing together, arguing, competing for Jack's attention. But while Sean and his brothers lived under the expectations shaped by Shirley's fame, David's world was more unsettled, shaped by Jack's inconsistencies and the struggle of belonging to two homes. Shirley remembers that David often seemed torn, balancing loyalty to his mother, respect for his father, and the rules of her own household. Then fame changed everything. In the early 1970s, David became a global superstar through his role on The Partridge Family, where Shirley played his mother. To millions of viewers, they looked like the perfect, joyful family. Behind the scenes, things were more complicated. Shirley was proud of his talent but saw how the pressure of stardom drained him. Concert tours, relentless press attention, and fans who pushed him to exhaustion left him overwhelmed and often unhappy. She worried about him deeply, yet she also had to protect her own children, who were suddenly living in the shadow of their stepbrother's fame. Public perception made everything harder. Fans believed she was both a mother figure and mentor to him, imagining a close bond that wasn't entirely real. Shirley later explained that although she cared for David, their relationship was more distant than people assumed. There were quiet walls between them shaped by his loyalty to his biological mother and by Jack's unpredictable influence on all their lives. She supported him when she could, but she sensed that he carried battles she could never fix. Jack's death in 1976 brought even more complexity. Without Jack as the link between them, Shirley and David were left to navigate what their relationship would become. Sometimes they shared warmth. Other times, distance settled back in. Shirley has said that grief occasionally drew them closer, but just as often it pushed them apart. She admired his talent and wished him happiness, yet she often felt like a visitor in his world rather than a defining part of it. What she emphasizes now is that the public picture was never the private one. She wasn't the guiding stepmother fans imagined. She was present in David's life, but not the anchor some believed her to be. She holds no resentment about that. Instead, she reflects with compassion, acknowledging that David's life was complicated and that she was never meant to replace his mother. Still, she treasures their small moments, quiet talks, family gatherings, glimpses of the boy behind the fame, because those were real, even if they were rare. Years later, when David faced his own crisis, those delicate connections would be tested in ways neither of them expected. After Jack's passing, Shirley found herself raising 3 boys alone. Sean, Patrick, and Ryan were no longer just kids navigating a Hollywood childhood. They were young men stepping into adulthood under the public eye, each responding to that scrutiny differently. Sean was the first to enter the world of fame directly. By the mid-1970s, his career surged with television roles, hit songs, and sold-out concerts. Shirley felt both pride and fear. She had watched fame consume Jack and worried Sean might fall into the same dangerous patterns. At home, she kept firm boundaries. School remained the priority. No special treatment was allowed. And family time had to be respected. But the outside world didn't always respect the boundaries Shirley tried to create. Everywhere they went, people recognized Sean, and the line between family life and public life grew thin. Patrick's experience was different. While his older brother was followed by fans, Patrick preferred quieter ambitions. He liked acting, but he didn't crave the frenzy that came with fame. Shirley remembers him as more guarded, thoughtful, and cautious about the spotlight. She admired those qualities, but they also created tension. In a household where one sibling was constantly celebrated, the others sometimes felt unseen. Shirley admits she struggled to balance things so that Patrick and Ryan felt appreciated, even when the media focused almost entirely on Sean. Ryan, youngest, had the hardest time. He was still in school when his brothers' careers began rising, and he often felt overshadowed. Shirley has said that Ryan carried resentment not only toward the media and the constant comparisons, but sometimes toward the family itself. He wanted a normal childhood, which was nearly impossible when reporters called their home. Photographers waited outside, and fans treated the family like something they owned inside the home. Shirley pushed for structure. She insisted on family dinners, curfews, and accountability. She made sure her sons understood that fame didn't excuse bad behavior. But she also admits that managing all 3 boys, especially after losing their father, was emotionally exhausting. Each one was different. Each needed something unique, and each coped with grief in his own way. Some nights ended with arguments, others with quiet tension. As they grew older, the pressures only intensified. Later in life, Shirley revealed what she considers her biggest regret, not seeing sooner how fame reshaped the boys' relationships with one another. Sean's success brought money, opportunity, and attention, but it also created jealousy and imbalance. She now wishes she had talked openly with them about those feelings, instead of believing discipline alone would solve the problem. She understands now that unspoken emotions linger far longer than spoken ones. Still, she devoted herself to protecting them from Hollywood's darker side. She monitored the parties they went to, limited who they spent time with, and constantly reminded them of their responsibility to the family name. She had witnessed how quickly young stars could lose themselves to drugs, scandals, and financial trouble. She wanted her boys to avoid that fate. Some listened, some resisted, and some carried scars from the struggle. Then came the decision that fractured the family more than anything else. In 1977, less than a year after Jack Cassidy's death, Shirley remarried. Her new husband, Marty Ingalls, brought his own whirlwind of energy and unpredictability into the home. For Shirley, it felt like a second chance at love, a man who made her laugh when her life was heavy with loss. But for her sons, Marty felt like an intruder entering a home still grieving. Shirley didn't anticipate the backlash. To her, marrying Marty was a lifeline. She had spent years surviving the volatility of Jack's behavior and then the shock of his death. Marty, with all his quirks, adored her completely. That was enough for her, but not for her sons. Sean, Patrick, and Ryan were teenagers, unprepared for a new stepfather. Some viewed Marty as a disruption, some as competition, and some as a threat to their bond with their mother. Family dinners became battlegrounds. Marty had a comedian's sharp tongue, and what he considered harmless humor often felt like disrespect to the boys. Shirley found herself caught between her loyalty to her children and her loyalty to her new husband. The press made things harder. Marty loved the spotlight and didn't mind making loud public statements, some of which embarrassed her sons. Fans who once held Shirley as a symbol of grace now had opinions about her marriage. And while Shirley stood by Marty, she admitted privately that he could be exhausting. She loved him, but life with him was never simple. Divisions grew sharper inside the house. The boys resisted Marty's involvement in family decisions. Shirley believed he deserved respect as her partner. They clashed over school choices, financial matters, even seating at the dinner table. But there were sides of Marty others didn't see. He was fiercely protective of Shirley, handled her business affairs, and defended her in ways Jack never had. To Shirley, Marty represented stability, messy, chaotic, but still a kind of stability. Yet the strain on her relationship with her sons remained. Over time, they learned to coexist, though not without scars. Marty's relationship with the boys stayed complicated, some days filled with laughter, other days with tension. Shirley reassured her sons that Marty didn't replace their father. But she later admitted that the marriage created distances she never fully mended. Everything began to shift when Marty's health declined. The man who had once been a source of conflict became someone the entire family found themselves rallying around. A reminder that even the most fractured bonds can soften when time, illness, and shared history draw everyone back together. Shirley's sons watched the way she cared for Marty as his health declined. And over time, some of the old tension began to ease. They might not have loved him as she did, but they learned to respect her choice, and in that respect, a fragile peace formed. Yet her family's story didn't settle into calm. In the years that followed, new losses and long-buried truths would reopen wounds she once believed had healed. One of the deepest of those wounds came during the final years of David Cassidy's life. By the time Shirley entered her later years, she had endured more than most. She had lost her first husband, watched her second husband's health deteriorate, and seen her children struggle under the unforgiving pressure of fame. But one of the hardest chapters involved David Cassidy, her stepson and former on-screen son. David had spent his entire life in the public eye. From the hysteria of the Partridge Family era to the relentless press scrutiny that followed him into adulthood. For Shirley, being both his stepmother and his television mother made their relationship complicated. She wanted to be supportive, but David's journey was marked by battles. She had no power to fix his struggles with alcohol, financial instability, and declining health that grew more severe as the years passed. Shirley often felt helpless watching him unravel. She had seen fame ruin people and feared David was one of its casualties. When his arrests for DUIs made headlines in the 2000s, she felt heartbreak mixed with frustration. She believed he was more gifted than most performers in Hollywood, yet she saw how he sabotaged himself behind the scenes. She hoped her sons would learn from his mistakes. Even as she chose to remain publicly silent to avoid adding to his shame, then his health took a sharper turn. In 2017, David revealed he had dementia, a diagnosis that shocked the world. Shirley later said she wasn't entirely surprised. She had noticed changes in his behavior. Moments when he seemed confused, signs something was wrong. But hearing the diagnosis confirmed felt like a blow. This was a boy she had once helped raise, a man she had worked beside, stepson who had spent part of his childhood under her roof. Now he was deteriorating in front of millions. What hurt Shirley the most was hearing David speak openly about their fractured relationship. He admitted he had always felt distant from her and from her sons, that fame had driven wedges between them, and that old wounds had never completely healed. Shirley didn't deny any of it. She acknowledged that their bond had always been complex, shaped by divided loyalties and by Jack's unpredictable influence. Still, she hoped they might grow closer in his final years. When David died in November 2017 at just 67, Shirley felt a deep mixture of grief and regret. She mourned not only the man he had been, but also the relationship they never fully achieved. She confessed to friends that she wished she had told him she loved him more often. Even if the bond between them had always been imperfect, she wished her own children could have known him without the shadow of fame, rivalry, and unresolved resentment. David's death pulled the family back into old memories. Jack's death, the fire, the instability that had shaped their earliest years. It also forced Shirley to confront what she calls the limits of love. She came to believe that you can love someone deeply, but you cannot save them if they do not want to be saved. It was one of the most painful truths she ever had to accept. In interviews later in life, Shirley spoke with rare honesty about David's struggles. She didn't hide from the truth, but she approached it with compassion. She urged families of young performers to stay vigilant, set boundaries, and recognize that talent and success mean nothing if the person behind them is falling apart. It was her way of turning personal heartbreak into a warning for others. But sharing those lessons required her to face things she had avoided for decades: the fractures in her family, the choices she regretted, and the true cost of a life lived in the spotlight.